time for our second edition of the Chicago Cubs trade value rankings. Let's have some fun.
You are Locked On Cubs, your daily Chicago Cubs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Cubs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. We are your team every day. I'm Sam Olber. I'm a lifelong fan, taking my passion into a discussion with you on all things Cubs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win Super Bowl 60 coming up. I cannot believe that. Really fun show for you today. Our second ever edition of the Chicago Cubs trade value rankings. Got this from Bill Simmons over at The Ringer. He does it every year with basketball trade value rankings. What does that mean, right? It's a very fun thought exercise. That's really what it is, because it's not grading out, hey, who are the best players? It's who's the most valuable asset in a trade. Essentially, think about it like this in the thought exercise. Who would get the most back in return in a deal with what you have? So there's really a couple of rules or parameters with it, right, that you want to look at. The first big thing is control, contract, salary, those things, right? You could have a really, really good player like an Alex Bregman, but he's making $35 million a year, and he has a full no trade clause. That's going to basically eliminate him from being in this list that I did. I only did a top 5 with honorable mentions. I'll get to that in a second. Another thing is age, right? How are they going to age? Simple, just, over time, future asset, like anything else in life. And then, best player doesn't mean best asset, right? So you're talking about, like I said, just the big things: age, contract, durability, things of those, of that nature. And I'll start by just saying the Cubs are a really fun exercise to do, because the Cubs have both extremes on their team or in their franchise, right? You have guys like Ian Happ, full no trade clause, 1 year left on his deal in his walk year. Same with Seiya. Similar to Tyone. Nico Horner, 1 year left on his deal. We just talked about Bregman, Swanson. All those guys are great examples of guys who are some of the best players on the team, right? Nico Horner, you can make a case, was the best player on the team last year. Alex Bregman, you can make a case he's going to be the best player on the team this year. Neither one was really in consideration at all for being some of their highest trade value. Who has the most trade value on the team because of the contract situation, no trade clause, age, etc. The way I would look at this is, in the NBA, the best player in the league, I think most GMs, if they did a survey, I think probably 90+% of them would say it's Nikola Jokic. But the guy who probably has the most trade value in the league is Victor Wembanyama, although the durability side of that is a different conversation. But just, how young he is and how he projects, he'd probably have the most trade value. In baseball, it's a little bit different, because I still think Ohtani, and especially Judge with his contract, it's pretty team friendly. I still think those two guys probably do have the most trade value, but it is a little bit different because under the current CBA, which is going to change soon, there's only a certain number of teams that could really trade for those guys' contracts. So, like, does that hurt their trade value? Is that limiting, to you don't have the suitors, you know what I mean? And those guys are never going to get traded anyway. But it's just a fun thought exercise. Last year I did a top 10 with honorable mention. Unfortunately, I think one of the negatives in what's been a very, very bright offseason for the Cubs is the realization now that their farm system isn't very good anymore. And they have some work to do in the future to redevelop that, because last year, Cam Smith and Owen Casey, those two guys were absolutely on my list. They're no longer in the organization. So a very fun exercise. I would love to hear your guys' top 5, top 10. If you think I'm wrong, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe Nico Horner should be on the list just because of his production. But these are the 5 guys that I believe would bring the most back in a trade. The Chicago Cubs' most valuable trade assets. And of course, I'm going to start with 2 massive honorable mentions. I'll even do an honorable mention to the honorable mention. Thought about their first round draft pick, Ethan Conrad. I guess he's an honorable mention, as an asset. I also thought about Jefferson Rojas. Matt mentioned Daniel Palencia. And then I thought Miguel Amaya was kind of interesting because he's under control through 2029. And, he could garner some trade interest, but he didn't make the big honorable mention list of 2, which is Jackson Wiggins and Edward Cabrera. I think both of those guys, I really should have done a top 7, but that just felt a little bit weird to do. I think Jackson Wiggins hasn't even made his big league debut yet, but I just think in any conversation with the year that he had, ERA under 3, power arm, this is the type of guy that every organization is looking for, a controllable starting pitcher. Edward Cabrera, you could really make the case should be on the list because he just got he was worth Owen Casey, right? And then some, but Owen Casey being the main guy. And I just think that, Owen Casey, he was in the top 10 of this list last year. Edward Cabrera, under control through 2028. So you got him for 3 years, 26, 27, 28. Again, power arm, tons of upside. Every organization in baseball is looking for a guy, 3 years of control, young arm, throws 99. Absolutely in the conversation. But as I said earlier, the Cubs are really fascinating on this list because they have extremes of guys who are pretty good players but aren't valuable trade assets, like I mentioned, with the no trades and things. But they really do have a strong list of 5. And Wiggins and Cabrera, I didn't think made the cut. Let's start with number 5. Number 5 on this list, I have to go with Moises Ballesteros. If there was more confidence in his catching ability, he'd probably be number 2, maybe even number 1 on this list because offensively, entering his age 22 season, he already is so seasoned, no pun intended, offensively. He could spray the ball all over the diamond. He has good plate discipline. The only real bugaboo with his offensive profile is he hits the ball on the ground a lot and he's not a fast runner. So that's something that you have to be a little bit concerned about. But he just profiles as a guy that's going to hit in the big leagues at a very young age. He's controlled through the 2031 season, meaning he's not a free agent until before 2032. I mean, you have him for a long time. What is that? 26, 7, 8, 9, 30, 31. You have him for 6 more years because this last year technically didn't even count as a full year of service time. So you have his 6 full years of service time still left. A guy that I think is going to be a really big part of the team. The only reason he's not higher on this list is because he doesn't have a position. He can't play first. He can't play the outfield. And I don't think he's going to be expected to catch much for the Cubs this year. I'd set the over-under on innings of him catching probably at like 10 and a half. I mean, I don't see it happening yet. It's such an important position right now in baseball, especially with the new stolen base rules. And I just don't think he's ready to do that. The big question with Ballesteros is if they, start to implement, this ABS challenge system often and you get good at it, maybe framing isn't as important as it used to be, which could make a case because if this guy could just be a league average catcher, you're talking about one of the most valuable guys in this organization. But for right now, I have him at number 5 in the Cubs' most valuable trade assets. Let's get to number 4 and beyond coming up next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Look, I got Seattle on FanDuel. It opened up at 3.5. I jumped on Seattle right away. It's been sitting at 4.5 all week slash last 10 days or so. This is one of those where I feel like if New England wins, or even if it's a really, really close game, I'll just chalk it up to it being just one of those years. I just don't have a feel for it at this point because I think Seattle is just so much better than New England everywhere. And I would be really surprised if they didn't win this Super Bowl. I really would be. I love Jackson Smith and Jigba for Super Bowl MVP. That was, I believe, 5-1 the last time I checked. That's good value. I think he's going to have a big day. But I just think Seattle's the better team and they're the right side. And if I'm wrong, it's not my year if I'm wrong because I really feel strongly about this. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are back here on Locked On Cubs. Thank you for making Locked On Cubs your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Cubs with no interruptions, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to lockedoncubs.supercast.com or check the link in this episode description. All right. Jumping right back into the list, number 4 on my Chicago Cubs trade value rankings. 5 Ballesteros, honorable mention Cabrera and Jackson Wiggins. Number 4, we're going to go with Matt Shaw, a guy that is in trade rumors a little bit. I don't see it happening. Another guy under control through the 2031 season. Still has 6 full years of control, or should I say 6 full seasons of control. I just think you have a guy that was a Gold Glove caliber third baseman. His ceiling offensively yet can't be measured. It wasn't a great year for him offensively. He had that good stretch in the second half. I've said this with Shaw a lot. I'll say it again. He's going to have to find a balance of the Cubs hitting philosophy, which is, hey, pull the ball in the air, versus what got him drafted and got him to the dance, which is hitting the ball with authority the other way. If he could find a nice happy medium of that, he's going to be a really, really, really good hitter. He's really young. It takes time. I've said this on the show a lot too. Like when you're in the face of it and you're the starting third baseman of a team that won 92 games, your struggles are going to stand out more than a typical 22, 23-year-old struggling on a team losing 100 plus games. Just because he went through some offensive growing pains last year, I don't think devalues the asset at all. I personally think his value right now is the same, if not maybe even a little higher than it was last year. Maybe that's wrong. That's probably wrong because the unknown in sports is always big, right? You love draft picks. You love guys that haven't played yet because you could just sell the unknown. I guess it's probably, I'm going to contradict myself, maybe a tad lower than it was last year just because there wasn't a ton of pop and things of that nature. But I still think it's very high. I think the floor on Matt Shaw is very high as a prospect. He can play all over the diamond, which I think we're going to see this summer. And I still think the offense is very intriguing. I just do. So for that reason, he's number 4 on my list. And I think he has to be on there. Number 3, Michael Busch. This is a big rise because I remember doing this exercise last year in my top 10. I think he made my top 10 if I remember correctly. But I was debating it because, first base, not a ton of value. He's 20. He was 27 last year, going into his 27 season. Now he's going to be 28 this year. So he's not that young in terms of baseball. But I really dug into it, guys. And this guy's under control through 29. So you got him 26, 27, 28, 29. You have him for 4 more full seasons. Last year, he was one of the best first basemen in baseball by any metric you want to live by. And he had, what was it for the full year? 39 home runs if you count the playoffs or something like that. and he played at Wrigley. Wrigley wasn't kind to him at all. He probably had about a 38, 39 home run regular season if you want to put in the park factor and things like that. He's a brilliant first baseman. He seems like he's only getting better. The case against this, and I'm here for it, is, how much value does a 28-year-old first baseman have versus a guy like Ballesteros and Shaw, way younger. Shaw can play all over the diamond. Ballesteros still has that catching part of his game. But I just think Michael Busch is a stud. I said one of my big resolutions this year on this podcast is to start treating him like a stud, because I haven't done a good enough job of that with his 2 years here in a Cub uniform. I was super, super high on him, like when we got him. And I think that's why it comes off that I'm not as big of a fan of him, because I kind of just expected him to rake from everything I heard from Dodgers, from the Dodgers, or how he was with the Dodgers, everything that, was sold to us. I just expected him to hit, and he hit, but I think I've undervalued him. And for that reason, maybe I'm overcorrecting here, putting him in the top 3, but how many teams have a guy, that is under control through the 29 season that you could just kind of, I think, pencil in for 30 plus homers, close to 100 RBIs, and close to Gold Glove defense, albeit at first base. I think the guy's a tremendous asset. And I know, I forget the other prospect that went to, Hope. It was Hope and Ferris went to the Dodgers. And I think those two guys are, very, very well received by the Dodgers, but I think Jed did a tremendous job with that trade. And I think Busch deserves, top 3 billing, up for debate, very subjective, of course. Number 2 and number 1 on my list, don't think that's debatable. I think we're all going to have the same top 2. Number 2 being Cade Horton. Cade was on the list last year. We talked about it. He had the opportunity to skyrocket based off of his 2025 season, and he also had the potential to be off this list if he had another year that was marred by injuries and not producing. Here we are over a year later. He probably should have won the Rookie of the Year. He was the Cubs' best pitcher through the second half of the season. If he stayed healthy, you can make this case very well. If he stays healthy, the Cubs might have made the National League Championship Series. And we're talking about a young pitcher in this regard, controlled through the 2030 season. What more is there to say about Cade Horton? I think it's one of the Cubs' finest jobs in terms of development. I can't wait to watch him this year. I know that, the projections aren't as high on him, but, you're talking about a guy who, I believe he's 24. I think he just turned 24 at the end of the season. Not a lot of innings under his belt. Completely dominant. The only case against this is just injuries and pitcher injuries and what that could cause. But I think he's surefire the number 2 most valuable trade asset the Cubs have. He's in the realm where if the Cubs are trying to go get whoever, or if they're for some reason they're in a sell-off, which they wouldn't be, and if they were, why would they trade Cade Horton? But you call any other GM in baseball and mention his name, everything in that organization stops. It's time to have a meeting, cup of coffee. Jed's interested in giving us Cade Horton. Do we want to give him player X and Y for that? We got to get everybody. Get the analytic people in, get the modeling in, get the donuts, get the bagels. We got to have a 2-hour meeting, right? That's the type of value Cade Horton has. I wonder if I were to really do this exercise in terms of most valuable pitching assets, where he would be. Obviously Skeens, being at the top of the list and, everyone else being behind him, but unbelievable asset and a guy that I can't wait to watch pitch in 2026. Number 1, one of the great assets in all the game right now, and that's Pete Crow-Armstrong, top 10 MVP finish last year, under control through 2030 for Pete. You're talking about having a guy that has the upside of being one of the 3, 4, 5 best players in baseball as soon as this year. He was one of the 5 best players for the first half of the season last year. 23 years of age, under team control, floor, flooding. It's so high with Pete. I mean, if the guy hits 240, he's going to be a valuable player with the way he plays defense and center. Would love to see him improve with the stolen bases, of course, and the base running, and of course, certain at bats. But the guy is far and away the number one asset that the Cubs have. If next year from now, if we were talking about PCA winning an MVP, would we be shocked? No. And because of his defense, like I said, there's just not a whole lot of risk in him being not an effective player. Clearly, one of the Cubs, the number one asset for the Cubs, and one of the best assets in all of baseball. Really curious to hear what you guys have to say. More on this list and some news and notes coming up next. All right, we are back here on Locked On Cubs. Very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Like I said on this, on the trade value stuff, I think what's so fascinating about the trade value list is how it could change year to year. Doing the exercise last year, there are a lot of similar faces. There were some guys that got moved due to injury, due to performance, some guys that got raised. I mean, Cade Horton, like I mentioned earlier. I think the most interesting guy, and the guy that can move the most one way or another from this time, until next year, would be Matt Shaw. I'm really interested to see, because the same things that I said about Pete could be, describing Matt Shaw if he becomes this, Swiss Army knife, can play corner outfielders, can play corner outfield spots, can play third base, can play short, can play second, and then the bat comes around. Because remember, with Pete, it really wasn't until, his not third full year, but his third stint with the Cubs where his bat really came alive. And, Matt Shaw, didn't start out great, got sent down, got a little bit better, then got worse, then got better again. It goes in waves. But if he were to, put a line together next year, let's say of 277, 330, 420, something like that, with really good defense all over the diamond, now you're talking about a guy that probably climbs all the way up to second or third, or depending on what Pete does. So it's a very year to year exercise, very fun to do. And I think my biggest takeaway from doing the exercise is that the Cubs are probably one of the more extreme teams, where like half of their main guys are totally non-trade assets because they're, going to be free agents next year, or, have no trade clauses. And then the other half are like prime, elite, exactly what you're looking for type players in today's game before they renegotiate the new CBA. Cheap, controllable guys that are producing on an everyday basis. I mean, in the top 5 outside of in the top 7 that I mentioned, outside of Wiggins, everybody is contributing at the major league level at a high level. Pete, one of your main guys. Bush, one of your main guys. Shaw, major league level. This year, Ballesteros, big league level. Cade Horton, maybe your ace. That's good. And then you also want to rebuild the farm at some point. And that transitions me into my, last thing I want to talk about today. And I'll mention this with Matt a little bit tomorrow, but the Cubs are still very much alive in the Zac Gallen market. Bruce Levine came on the Score 670, made a joke that his prediction that the best pitcher on the Cubs at midseason or the deadline, whatever it was described, was going to be Zac Gallen, making you think maybe he has some information that Gallen could be a Cub. And I can't wrap my head around this one, not in a bad way. Just, if the Cubs were to sign Zac Gallen, is there a world where they try and make this offseason just like the biggest home run of home runs, and then turn in one of their other pitchers, trade one of their other pitchers for some minor leaguers to try and replenish the farm system? Is that on their radar? I know you never can have too much pitching, but if Steele is back in May, June, and I know that's going to probably be a slow return with an innings limit, guys will probably be hurt, but you have Imanaga, Steele, Horton, Boyd, Tyone, Cabrera all in the fold. I I thought once they traded for Edward Cabrera, that kind of did it for me, starting pitching wise. And again, I'm not saying I'm opposed to adding Zac Gallen, but you also have to remember you have Colin Ray. He was one of your top most reliable starters from start to finish last year. Javier Assad could come in and pitch. Again, I'll never sit here and say you could have too much starting pitching depth, but I find it hard to believe if they made a move for Zac Gallen, is there a world where somebody else could be on the move? Is there a world where somebody else could be, I don't know. I don't know. The bullpen, is there something going on with maybe Horton's innings? Is there a lack of trust in Shota, despite what has been said publicly by the manager and the president of baseball ops? I don't know, but that's a lot of pitchers. That's like 7 or 8, guys that you feel really comfortable with in the fold. But maybe I'm just overthinking it. And go look at the Dodgers, go look at teams that have struggled in the past with pitching depth. You never can have too much. But I find it fascinating that they're still in talks, with Gallen. And I just, I know Matt's talked about it, and I'm not opposed to it. I wonder what that contract looks like. I feel like, and this is anecdotal, this could be wrong, but I feel like the longer it goes for these free agents, most of the time it starts to turn into, not all the time, but most of the time it turns into a lot of, hey, opt out after year one, short-term deal, maybe higher AAV. Like, I don't think he's going to, sign a full 5-6 year deal sort of thing. He probably wants to pitch himself back into the conversation with some of the top free agents. So maybe it's just a short-term thing, which, the Cubs like that. The Cubs are an opportunistic front office. They look for value, and if it falls into their lap, like the Bleacher Nation article that I read this morning was saying, they're going to take advantage of it. They did that with Shota. They did that with Bellinger the second go around. They look for deals. They look for value. I'm just curious, and I maybe have to think about it deeper and talk about it with Matt on tomorrow's show. What would the fit look like? And am I overreacting to, who cares about what the fit looks like? Just get as many starting pitchers that you can as possible and figure out the rest later. But the great news is, and I'll end the show with this, the fact that the Cubs are even in the conversation with Zac Gallen after all this, it just ensures that they are doing their version of going all in. I don't think there's other versions of going all in. We get it, but they're really taking this year seriously, and they're trying to, figure out every single thing that could go wrong, fill that hole, like in 2016 when Schwarber got hurt, some sort of disaster scenario like Jed was talking about with Cap. You always assume what could go wrong, and making sure that you have a plan B for that. And I'm never, ever going to argue with that. So it'll be really exciting. Matt and I will talk about this more for tomorrow. Thank you for making Locked On Cubs your first listen of the day. For those of you on video, we send you to the 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel, and on audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On MLB. Hope you guys enjoyed the trade value list. We'll do that every year. It's really fun. Ironically, Bill Simmons came out with his today. That was not planned, but we got it from him. And fun exercise. Cubs got a lot of really good young talent. Have a great night. Go Cubbies.